Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick too. I'm sure you guys have been hearing a lot about Whirlwind Barbarian, so today I just wanted to offer something a little bit new on the table, especially for those of you guys that are just getting into the end game and you don't have a bunch of legendaries or anything like that, you're very unoptimized. This build is completely perfect for you, so if you're having a hard time getting the Whirlwind unique or anything like that, this build functions very well without having crazy gear or anything, and it's honestly a blast to use. I'm not entirely sure how good it is relative to Whirlwind because that remains to be seen how powerful both of these can scale up. It really depends later into the game. It's a little bit too early to be making value judgments and determine which is the absolute best. But honestly, as you can see, I mean, it's incredibly powerful. Bossing potential is crazy. It does just an unbelievable amount of damage, and it just feels very nice to play. And this is an incredibly unoptimized version of the build. Like, the gear on this character is actually incredibly unfortunate. It could be literally like 300% better. But also, the later that you get into the game, this build is also just going to scale up even more and more. So yeah, I'm really excited to show it to you guys. By the way, there's a drops event going on over on Twitch. So if you guys want to come get some free skins, help support me, swing by. That would be greatly appreciated. Love to see more of you guys around. By the way, for full transparency, this build was created by my friend, and I kind of helped him theorycraft some of the stuff and optimize it. So all of the gameplay is going to be from him. So I'm just going to be going over the skill tree here, and I'll just be going over everything with you guys. But this is characters like level 63 or so, and this build is pretty much what I use the entire time. And it's been, fantastic, as you can see in the gameplay. It just clears things very, very quickly, and it doesn't really need very much to go. When I looked at his gear, I was like, I can't believe you're doing this much damage, because the gear he has is actually really bad, and it could be 100 times better. So getting into the skill tree here, you want to start out with Lunging Strike. Lunging Strike just generates a lot of fury, and it also is just going to give you a ton of really necessary mobility that without this is going to be pretty miserable. Lunging Strike also does a lot of damage too, but it's fantastic. A lot of the time you're just going to be running through dungeons just pressing Lunging Strike, and you pretty much just Lunging Strike up until you get to an elite pack, and then you start blowing stuff up. Until then, it's just a waste of time. With this build, we're obviously using Hammer the Ancients. Hammer the Ancients by itself does not have crazy damage. One of the better things about it, though, is that it does have a 50% lucky hit chance, which builds into a lot of other stuff later. But one of the things that is very good about it are these modifiers here. So you gain 3% more fury for 5 seconds with each enemy damage. A lot of the time you'll be literally hitting 10 enemies, because Hammer of the Ancients with the legendary quakes out and will just hit everything. So a lot of the time you gain 30% more fury gen, which is really nice. But the best thing about this is the Hammer of Ancients deals 1% additional damage for each point of fury that you had when using it. You can scale up your maximum fury crazy on Barbarian. I think at this point this character has about 150, but you could get probably well over into the 200s. This character doesn't even have it on rings. I think you can get it on rings, potentially the amulet, but this character does have it on the helmet, and you can get it in upwards of like 20 to 30 per. And because you have so much fury generation through some stuff we'll talk about later, but mainly with your shouts, you can get maximum fury instantly, no matter how much fury you have. Even if you had 500, you can get maximum fury instantly with the amount of fury generation that you have. So a multiplicative 1% increase of damage of that, if you have 100% extra fury, that's 100% extra damage, assuming you can keep that up. So that is incredibly strong, which basically means that this build just has a really, really high ceiling for scaling, because you're basically buffing the damage of your core skill by multiplicative percentages, which is just really, really, really powerful. So that is the main reason for Hammer the Ancients, and the reason that it is so powerful here. But as you can see, you can get like 13 maximum fury on the helmet here, and this is not even a very good roll. This is like a sacred item, right? So the later into the game, this will scale up even more. Moving on to the skill tree, you just want to put 3 points into Endless Fury here, so that skills generate 15% more fury. And there's also another node here that's a lucky hit chance, 30% chance to apply vulnerable. Hammer of the Ancients is a 50% lucky hit. You won't be proccing that a ton, but it's really helpful on bosses to keep vulnerable up. You could allocate the 3 points elsewhere, but it really just helps with your bossing. But for AoE, you don't need it, because you apply vulnerable with exploit, but I still think it is a generally good thing to have. Maybe not 3 points into it, but I don't know, without it, it's pretty rough. And Endless Fury is nice for the fury generation. Rallying Cry is something that you want to juice up if possible, but it's a little difficult because there's a lot of passives that you need, but you pretty much need this for the fury generation for this build to even function. And we're going to be playing triple shout with all the shout legendaries, because it's just broken. The amount of fury generation that you get and everything else that the shouts provide is insane. I mean, challenging shout is a lot of damage reduction. Later on into the game, you'll definitely want to buff challenging shout for even more DR. And you'll want to get shout skills plus shout skills on like your amulet and stuff, which you can get up to probably like 4 or 5 later into the game, so that you're buffing all of these. And then buffing Rallying Cry is good to get increased resource gen, but later on you probably just can't do it. But yeah, anyways, challenging shout gives you a lot of extra fury. Rallying Cry is also there for the fury. War Cry is also just there because, With the Fury Legendary or the Shout Legendary, you get a lot of extra Fury. Right? Talking about shouts forever. Of course, because we're using all the shouts, you want to buff the duration of them. And then you can also back out some points. You're really starved for points on this build. You kind of have to pick between damage and survivability. Raid Leader is pretty good for survivability here, getting the extra healing while the shouts are active. But you could, like, you know, swap points out of Rallying Cry and put it in there. But like I said, the build is super starved for points. Then you go 3 points into this. This gives you damage reduction while you are berserking, and then this also gives you Fury generation while you are berserking as well. You need the Fury generation, but later into the game, if you have high enough, you could actually take the points out of this entirely and go into more damage less survivability. Then we have 3 points into Pit Fighter and No Mercy for just extra damage. And then we have Hamstring here. We have a legendary that's going to make it to where every single attack that we do while we're berserking, which we're going to be berserking all the time, is going to apply bleed, so that we're slowing enemies 24/7, so that we can take advantage of damage versus slowed and damage versus crowd controlled. Also, just a really nice thing to have guaranteed. When we get further down to the tree, you want to put 3 points into Tempered Fury. This is just going to increase your maximum Fury by 9 by default, which is obviously going to be really strong. And then we're going to put 3 points into, yeah, here it is. Each time you swap weapons, gain 6 Fury. You could probably take the points out of this. This is actually what you'd want to take the points out of later into the game. Right now, the Fury generation is a little unfortunate because, like I said, this character's gear is unbelievably bad. But the later that you get into the game, you don't need this extra Fury gen. It's only 6 every time that you swap weapons, which you're going to do every time that you use your Lunging Strike. And basically the way that you want to play this build is you Lunging Strike, Hammer, Lunging Strike, Hammer, which we'll talk more about later with some of the Paragon stuff, and also the Legendaries. We're using Wrath of the Berserker, basically another shout. It's just really good for bossing, and also anytime your shouts happen to be down or something, this just gives you crazy extra damage and extra Fury generation. And then obviously we're using the Fury generation passive, or not Fury generation, the Fury spending passive, so that our core skill does even more damage. 135% multi. I mean, this is kind of why Barbarian is so incredibly powerful. And we each have 3 points into Heavy-Handed and 3 points into Wallop for literally just extra damage. Heavy-Handed you could potentially get rid of later because it's only 15% additive crit damage, but Wallop is 15% multiplicative vulnerable damage, so you definitely want to be grabbing that. When it comes to the Paragon Board, no idea if this is optimal. Have not looked into the Paragon Board that much. This character is very early on, and I imagine for a lot of you guys, you're early into the endgame, so don't worry about it too much. The main thing is that you need Exploit in your first glyph slot. This is crazy. When an enemy's damaged, they're instantly vulnerable, so you go into a pack, hammer the Ancients, boom, they're instantaneously vulnerable. Vulnerable damage is multiplicative, and it's on its own multiplier, so it's pretty much the best source of extra damage in the game. Make sure to take advantage of this. Unbelievably powerful. Put it in your first slot no matter what build you're playing pretty much. Later into the game, you'll be swapping it out of the first one and trying to optimize where you want to put it. But for now, put it in the first slot just so you get it unlocked early. Then for the next board, this is interesting. Again, I don't know if this is perfect, but what's really nice about this board is that it has a bunch of maximum fury. You get 8, 4, 4, and maximum fury on kill, or fury on kill. That's a lot of extra fury, and because we're scaling our damage with our maximum fury here, Whirlwind and stuff doesn't do that. So the more fury that we get, which is a lot here, it's like almost 20, and then there's another 20 near the top of the board here. That is crazy, man. You're 20% extra damage basically with all this fury, and there's a lot of other stuff that scales off of it, so that's really good. And there's also a lot of extra nodes in here that are pretty nice. And then we just put in Mortal Draw. This makes it to where anytime that you swap your weapon, immediately afterward, the next skill is going to have an 18% increased crit. This just pairs perfectly with the build because we're constantly going Lunging Strike, Hammer, Lunging Strike, Hammer, Lunging Strike, Hammer. So this just gives us 18% crit all the time, and we get 27% extra damage with skills that are going to swap to new weapons. And since all of the glyphs got nerfed, 27% with very low point investment is actually really good this early into the game. So this is particularly nice. And where this pairs even better is when you use the legendary aspect, Expectant. This is a very bad roll of it, but basically, anytime you use your basic skill, if you have a good roll, it's 10% increased damage for your next core skill. So that's really good, just 10%. But also, a lot of the time, you're lunging striking through packs. You get to an elite, boom, 30% multiplicative extra damage. That's really nice. So definitely make sure to look out for that. And that's how you want to be playing the build, pretty much. And it really just functions well together, right? Like getting all the extra crit, getting all the extra fury, getting all the extra damage from here. It just scales very nicely. So then, of course, we have the Shout Legendary. Ideally, instead of having Expectant on the ring here, you would have the other Shout Legendary where it reduces the cooldown. This character has never gotten that. My friend is the unluckiest person on the planet, which I can easily tell by looking at his gear. Very unfortunate. But that is going to make it to where you have very high uptime on your shouts, which the shouts are insane for a number of reasons, right? But one of the main reasons is 4 fury per second, but it stacks per shout, which also stacks with resource generation percentage, which you have built into the shouts themselves. So this gives you 12 fury by default, which scales up per second. And the more fury that you have, the more damage you're doing, right? So this just really helps with the build. This is the minimum roll of this, which is terrible, and it's still really powerful. And you guys saw how strong my friend was being able to just nuke stuff. Moving on to the amulet here, this could even potentially be on a two-hander, but each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill increased damage. Obviously this is really good because we're constantly generating fury past our max, especially when we are lunging striking through packs. But the more fury generation that we get, the more that we are going to benefit from this. And with all the shout legendaries passively giving us all this fury, gives us a whole bunch of extra damage. This legendary remains to be tested on my end. I'm not entirely sure if it really increases Hammer the Ancients damage, but basically it gives you Hammer the Ancients a quake effect, which is really nice, just giving it AoE. It's possible you want to put this on a two-hander. I'd recommend testing it, putting it on a two-hander, but right now it's on a one-hander and the build still does very good, so is what it is. But definitely try it out on a two-hander. Then you want whenever you are berserking, 20% of the damage that you deal is bleeding damage. This just makes it to where we always apply bleed, so we can take advantage of damage versus bleeding, damage versus crowd controlled as a result, etc. But also just 20% extra damage against like bosses and stuff. On elites, you kind of want to one-shot them, so not as great. And on two-hander, Edge Masters, this is a pretty bad roll. You get up to 40%, but based on how much resource you have, 40% extra damage. This just works very well with all the Fury stuff. A lot of the time you'll have max Fury, so 40% extra damage when you're pressing your hammer is really good. This is bad. 48% increased damage while you have a barrier active is very good, but you don't have barrier active all that much. Ultimately, you'd probably rather this be a number of other things here, probably like Expectant or the Core Skill one. But we do have damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier, so this is up every once in a while, mainly for like nuking elites, but ultimately you want to swap this to basic skills, give you 20% damage reduction at some point for the survivability here, and that would just be significantly better, and then you just want to swap something else on the legendary. Another aspect that's really good is damaging an enemy with a core skill has a 30% chance to extend the duration of berserking by 1 second, but it's double if it's a crit. This is really nice because Hammer has a really high lucky hit chance. You could swap this to something more survivability oriented later, but because Hammer has a 50% lucky hit, you'll proc this every once in a while and increase the duration of your berserking. But once you get the shout cooldown reduction legendary, you may not need this anymore because you're spamming the shouts to keep your berserking up anyways. This is just a legendary that's on because unfortunately this character never got the shout reduction one, so we just have an extra slot, right? So put on after swapping weapons 10 times, your next attack will overpower. So after every 10 lunging strikes, you'll get a nice overpower, and overpower does actually a lot of extra damage here. So this is going to make it do 30% extra damage. By default, it does a lot, but also if you get overpower damage on some weapons and stuff, you can scale overpower crazy, and it might even be possible that you want to have a weapon swap as your 4th skill so that you can take advantage of this even more. That could be a potential build, but right now it's kind of just there. As you can see, 160% extra overpower damage. And when it comes to the legs, Disobedience is something that is pretty much mandatory. It gives you a crazy amount of armor. This is a really bad roll of it, but this is going to give you a massive boost to your survivability. And then for the boots, there's probably a number of like movement-based things that you want to go for, but this character has Penitent Greaves, which is probably best in slot for most people. It applies crowd control, and you deal extra damage against enemies that are chilled, and you're chilling enemies with this, so that's just extra damage all the time, right? When it comes to what you actually want on your stats, the main thing is getting maximum fury on like your helmet, your rings and stuff. And then after that, you want to get ranks to shouts. And then you want on your gloves, ranks to Hammer the Ancients, which this character also doesn't have, which is missing a crazy amount of damage for Hammer the Ancients. And then in terms of what you want on your weapons for just normal stats, vulnerable damage is the absolute best thing that you can get. Core skill damage is really good. And then strength is multiplicative, so that's also fantastic. But Barb has a lot of stats that are good because of the way that this build works. So damage versus slowed, we're always slowing. Damage versus bleeding is going to work for bosses as well as mobbing, so that's really good. Core skill damage obviously is good. Damage versus close is good. Damage while berserking is also good. All those are additive, so pretty much see core skill damage and damage to bleeding as the same thing, but the only multiplicative sources are vulnerable and strength, so you want to prioritize both of those and then go for the other stuff later. And for the most part, the other stuff is the same because it's all additive with each other. When it comes to technique, you want to be playing Axe. My friend accidentally was not even playing Axe, so he's missing a crazy amount of damage here. 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, which we're applying all the time, and also 10% increased crit chance against vulnerable enemies, which is crazy. Sword is okay, but it's not nearly as good as Axe is, so definitely make sure to be playing Axe. And then your Lending Strike is going to be using a slashing weapon anyways, or it doesn't really matter what your Lending Strike uses, just make it use a different weapon than your hammer, and your hammer has to use a bludgeoning weapon. So make sure to optimize that. Hopefully this format wasn't too scuffed for you guys. If it was, let me know in the comments, and I will try to make better ones if I have help with friends showcasing their builds in the future. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please make sure to drop a like, and let me know how this functions. I'm really excited to see Barbarian. Like, this really makes me want to hop on a Barbarian of my own and set this up, because this is unbelievably unoptimized, and it's still crazy strong, and hammer is just really fun to use. It feels very fluid. It feels really fast. You don't have to, like, whirlwind and wait around 5 seconds. You just press hammer, boom, everything dies, It's fantastic. Anyways, that's going to be the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.